There are people who walk into your life not to share energy, but to consume it. You feel it instantly, the heaviness in the room, the subtle tension that wraps around your chest, the way your mind starts racing even though nothing's wrong. These individuals are not necessarily evil or malicious, but they carry a storm within them that seeks a host. Their energy is chaotic, scattered, and unresolved, and if you are sensitive, compassionate, or deeply attuned, you become their favorite outlet. You don't notice it at first. You call it empathy, you call it being supportive. You tell yourself you're helping someone through their darkness, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to fade. The energy drainers are masters of emotional contagion. They don't have to raise their voice to deplete you. Sometimes it's their constant complaining, their fixation on problems, their refusal to take responsibility. They find comfort in crisis because crisis makes them feel alive. Their chaos gives them a sense of identity. And so, when life calms down, they unconsciously recreate turbulence. They attract conflict, and if you're not careful, they'll pull you into it too. You'll start to mistake their emotional intensity for connection. But connection built on pain is not intimacy, it's bondage. They disguise their patterns as vulnerability. They come to you with stories of betrayal, loss, unfairness. They make you feel special because you're the only one who understands. But understanding soon becomes exhaustion. What began as compassion turns into caretaking. They bring you their storms, and you start holding the umbrella. You stay because you feel guilty walking away. But guilt is the hook they rely on. It keeps their supply intact. They need someone to absorb their emotions, someone to carry the weight of their unresolved stories. They don't seek healing, they seek hosts. Every conversation becomes a rehearsal of suffering. Every meeting leaves you drained, questioning why you feel so tired even after a simple exchange. That's because your body registers energy before your mind can explain it. You leave their presence carrying emotional residue that doesn't belong to you. Their despair becomes your mood. Their anger becomes your vibration. They transfer their storm into your calm, and you call it empathy because you were taught that helping others means sharing their pain. But the truth is, empathy without boundaries is emotional self-destruction. You see, the energy drainers are not always obvious. They can be kind, even charming. They might appear deeply self-aware, often using emotional language to justify their turmoil. But their awareness never leads to action. They analyze endlessly but never transform. They are addicted to being stuck. Their pain is familiar, and familiarity feels safe. Healing, on the other hand, feels threatening because it means letting go of the story that defines them. So they cling to it, and anyone who listens becomes an extension of their narrative. If you're not grounded, their energy starts shaping your own. You start mirroring their pessimism, seeing the world through their fatigue. You begin to shrink your light so it doesn't irritate their darkness. You walk on eggshells, afraid your happiness might offend them. You apologize for being okay, and slowly your energy starts to match theirs, not because you are the same, but because energy sinks through proximity. That's why awareness is power. When you understand the cost of emotional exposure, you start protecting your inner space like sacred ground. There comes a moment when you must realize that saving people who enjoy their suffering is not compassion, it's codependence. You can offer a hand, But you cannot drag someone out of the hole. They keep digging for comfort. Some people don't want solutions. They want sympathy. They crave the validation that comes from being seen as the one who's always hurt, always misunderstood. And every time you console them, you reinforce their identity as the victim. You think you're helping them heal, but you're helping them remain the same. The energy drainers often appear when your own boundaries are unclear. They are drawn to givers, to healers, to those who confuse love with sacrifice. They sense your openness and move in quietly. You think they need your advice, your compassion, your time, but what they really want is your energy. And once they receive it, they feel lighter while you feel emptied. That's the unspoken exchange that keeps repeating until you recognize the pattern and step away. It's not your responsibility to carry someone else's emotional weight. You are not a container for another person's chaos. The moment you realize that your peace is worth protecting, you stop responding to every crisis that doesn't belong to you. You stop answering every emotional emergency that's not yours to fix. Silence becomes your boundary. Distance becomes your medicine. You no longer feel guilty for stepping back because you understand that protecting your energy is not abandonment, it's alignment with your own soul. The energy drainers will call you cold. They will accuse you of being selfish, distant, or detached. That's because your withdrawal threatens the ecosystem they've built around emotional dependency. When you refuse to engage in their drama, they lose control over your attention, and attention is their lifeline. But you must remember, your attention is sacred currency. Where you direct it determines the quality of your inner world. Protect it fiercely. Every time you choose peace over participation in someone's chaos, you're teaching your nervous system what safety feels like. Every time you walk away from emotional manipulation disguised as love, you're reclaiming your power. You begin to notice the difference between helping and enabling, between caring and carrying. The energy drainers will always exist, but your relationship to them can transform. Awareness turns victims into observers, and observers into protectors of their own vitality. When you master this awareness, no one can quietly feed on your light without your permission. They rarely shout, rarely demand, rarely show their control openly. Their mastery lies in subtlety, in the quiet art of emotional orchestration. These are the people who smile as they pull your strings, who make you question your own perceptions, while convincing you that everything they do is for your good. The masters of mass manipulation are not tyrants in appearance. They are charmers, helpers, and listeners. But beneath their calm surface lies a deep hunger for control disguised as care. You don't see it at first because they hide behind empathy, generosity, and gentle words that make you feel understood. That's how they gain access to your trust, and once they have it, they begin their work. They don't dominate through power. They dominate through guilt. You start noticing small phrases that sound harmless but twist your emotions. After everything I've done for you, they whisper. You've changed lately. They sigh, planting doubt in your mind. They use affection as bait and silence as punishment. When you agree with them, they shower you with warmth. When you resist, they withdraw affection, leaving you desperate to regain their approval. They train you emotionally, not through commands, but through patterns of reward and withdrawal. Before you know it, your mood depends on their validation. You become addicted to pleasing them because they've quietly tied your self-worth to their acceptance. These manipulators understand one truth. Control is easiest when it feels like love. They know how to read emotional vulnerabilities, to sense the soft spots where your defenses fall. They might present themselves as protectors, advisors, or partners who only want what's best for you. But what's best always ends up aligning with their desires. They wrap control in the language of care. They make you believe that your independence is recklessness, that your intuition is confusion, that your instincts are wrong. And because their tone is never openly cruel, you begin to think the problem is you. They are masters at rewriting reality. If you confront them, they twist your words so effortlessly that you end up apologizing for things you didn't do. They use selective memory, recalling only the moments that serve their narrative. They turn your valid reactions into evidence of your instability. You start doubting your emotions, silencing your intuition, second-guessing every thought before speaking. That's how manipulation wins, not by force, but by eroding your trust in yourself. The most dangerous prison is the one built in your mind by someone who claims to love you. What makes them powerful is their invisibility. They blend into your life like a soft rhythm, slowly tuning your behavior until you move to their beat without realizing it. You start making choices to keep peace rather than to seek truth. You avoid certain topics to prevent conflict. You minimize your achievements to avoid their subtle jealousy. And over time, you start existing as a version of yourself that feels small, cautious, edited. They've conditioned you to equate peace with obedience. You don't notice the manipulation because it's dressed in the language of harmony. The masters of mass manipulation often carry deep insecurity underneath their polished surface. They need control because without it, they feel unseen, irrelevant, or powerless. Their charm is not genuine confidence, it's a survival mechanism. They manipulate to avoid the terror of vulnerability, but knowing their wound doesn't mean you must carry it. Understanding why someone manipulates doesn't justify allowing it. Awareness is not permission. They have an uncanny ability to sense when you're drifting away. Just as you start setting boundaries, they shift their tactics. They may suddenly play the victim, making you feel cruel for pulling back. I guess I'm just not good enough for you anymore. They'll say, weaponizing self-pity to draw you in. And because you're kind, you rush to reassure them. You explain yourself over and over until the focus is no longer on their behavior, but on your guilt. That's their brilliance. They keep you emotionally entangled by keeping you defensive. Sometimes they appear in relationships, other times in families, workplaces, or friendships. In every setting, the dynamic is the same. They create dependence. They make themselves indispensable, emotionally, practically, or psychologically. So leaving feels like betrayal. They plant the idea that without them, you'll fail. And when you start believing that, they don't have to manipulate anymore. You begin doing it to yourself. You censor your thoughts before they can disapprove. You anticipate their moods before they express them. That's how control becomes internalized. Their words often sound loving, but feel heavy. Their concern always carries a hidden agenda. They might say, I just worry about you. But what they mean is, I want to influence your decisions. They might insist, I'm only being honest, when what they're doing is diminishing yourself esteem under the guise of truth. Their manipulation is so refined that it leaves no scars, only confusion. You start wondering if you're overreacting, if you're imagining things, but deep down, your body knows. It tenses around them. It feels drained after every conversation. The body always reveals the truth that the mind is too afraid to name. Breaking free from such influence doesn't happen through confrontation alone. It begins with detachment. The moment you stop explaining yourself, their power starts to fade. They rely on your participation in their emotional game. When you stop defending, justifying, or reasoning, they lose the very fuel that sustains their control. Silence is their greatest defeat because it mirrors back the emptiness behind their manipulation. But the danger of the masters of masked manipulations is not just in what they take. It's in what they teach you to believe about love. They make you associate affection with tension, closeness with anxiety, compromise with self-erasure. After them, healthy love feels unfamiliar, even boring, because you've been conditioned to equate intensity with importance. Healing requires unlearning their rhythm. You must learn that love does not confuse, that kindness does not guilt, that support does not silence. The quiet manipulation of others can only survive where self-trust has been lost. The moment you return to your own inner authority, their influence begins to dissolve like mist under sunlight. There are people who wear their wounds like armor, not to heal, but to be seen. They live in a constant state of suffering, narrating their life as a tragedy in which they are always the powerless character, forever mistreated, forever misunderstood. The perpetual victims exist in every environment. Relationships, workplaces, families. They turn every event, every encounter, into another scene of their ongoing misfortune. At first, you feel compassion. You want to help, to understand, to listen. But soon, you realize that your empathy is being consumed, not received. They don't seek healing. They seek witnesses for their pain. Their suffering is not a wound they want to close. It is an identity they refuse to release. They begin with stories that touch your heart. Tales of betrayal, of abandonment, of being used by others. They speak softly, yet their words carry the weight of unending disappointment. You listen, believing that kindness might ease their pain. You offer advice, encouragement, new perspectives. But no matter what you suggest, they find reasons it won't work. Every solution you give is met with resistance, disguised as realism. They will tell you that life is unfair, that no one ever truly helps them, that their situation is different. You start realizing that their pain isn't a problem to them, it's a performance. They have learned that pity is power. The perpetual victims use suffering as currency. By being the most wounded, they command attention. They manipulate through fragility. They know that good-hearted people will walk on eggshells around them, afraid to cause further hurt. But what looks like fragility is often emotional control. The more you adjust to protect their feelings, the more power they gain. They pull you into their orbit of sadness, and soon your energy begins to match theirs. You start to feel responsible for their moods, guilty for your happiness, and fearful of expressing anything positive because it might remind them of what they lack. That's how they bind you through emotional guilt. They live through patterns of repetition. Every new situation somehow becomes an echo of their old wounds. They attract the same kind of pain again and again because they are unconsciously loyal to their suffering. It gives them a sense of purpose. Their stories of victimhood justify their stagnation. If life has always been cruel, then they never have to take responsibility for changing it. Pain becomes their proof that the world owes them something. They romanticize endurance, mistaking it for depth. But endurance without transformation is just self-pity dressed as wisdom. What makes them so exhausting is their ability to turn compassion into obligation. They blur the line between caring and carrying. You begin by helping out of love, and you end up helping out of fear. Fear of being called unkind, of being misunderstood, of being blamed for their unhappiness. Their suffering becomes a silent contract. As long as they remain miserable, you must remain available. If you ever set boundaries, they respond with disappointment or passive withdrawal. They might say, "Oh, I guess you're just like everyone else." And in that moment, they plant the seed of guilt that keeps you tied to them. The perpetual victims are experts at emotional inversion. They can turn your concern into cruelty and your distance into betrayal. They'll accuse you of abandoning them, even when you've given everything you could. They twist reality until you start questioning your own intentions. You begin to wonder if you really are insensitive, if you really could have done more. That's how they maintain control, by turning your empathy against you. The very quality that makes you human becomes the tool they use to feed their narrative. They often speak the language of healing, but never take the path. They talk about self, awareness, about being hurt in childhood, about how people have failed them. But every word serves to reinforce the same story, that they are broken beyond repair. They don't use insight to grow. They use it to justify their immobility. They can intellectualize their pain, but not transcend it. Their self-awareness becomes a shield, protecting them from responsibility. The more you try to lift them, the more they anchor themselves deeper into despair, proving that life truly is as tragic as they claim. Over time, you begin to notice how their presence affects you. Their energy feels heavy, their conversations cyclical. You start anticipating their complaints before they speak. You feel drained after every interaction, yet somehow guilty for noticing it. That's because you've been conditioned to associate compassion with exhaustion. But compassion without discernment becomes self-betrayal. Not everyone who cries for help truly wants to rise. Some simply want company in their suffering. The perpetual victims fear accountability because it threatens their narrative. If they admit their role in their own unhappiness, they lose the identity that has kept them safe. Responsibility feels like annihilation to them, so they project their inner helplessness outward, blaming life, people, fate, anything but themselves. They don't see that every time they tell the same story, they re-energize the pain they claim to hate. They feed it with attention until it becomes the center of their existence. Their sadness is their sanctuary. Without it, they wouldn't know who they are. And yet, what makes them most dangerous is not their suffering. It's their subtle influence. Their worldview seeps into yours. You begin to see life through their lens of disappointment. You start expecting betrayal, doubting joy, mistrusting ease. Their heaviness becomes contagious. You forget that optimism is not naivety, that happiness is not insensitivity. They train you to believe that feeling good is a privilege you should apologize for. You cannot argue them into healing. You cannot love them into wholeness. The more you try to fix their pain, the deeper you step into their emotional maze. You end up apologizing for boundaries you should never have to explain. You start silencing your laughter, dimming your brightness, censoring your truth. They turn you into a smaller version of yourself because your strength reminds them of what they refuse to claim. That's the hidden tragedy. Their pain demands loyalty, and in offering it, you risk losing yourself. There comes a moment when you realize that you cannot participate in someone else's chosen misery. You can offer compassion without captivity, empathy without erosion, understanding without absorption. The perpetual victims will always find a reason to remain where they are, because in suffering they are seen, and being seen is the closest thing they've ever known to love. They watch you not to celebrate you, but to measure themselves against you. Every success you achieve becomes a silent reminder of what they haven't done. Every light you radiate reflects the shadows they've been avoiding. The envious comparers are those who turn admiration into resentment. They may smile when you speak, but behind that smile lies a quiet calculation, an invisible scoreboard where your victories subtract from their worth. They exist in the hidden corners of every social circle, workplace, and family, feeding on comparison as if it were survival. To them, life is not about growth, but about ranking. Someone must be above, and someone must be beneath. And if you happen to rise, they begin to ache. You sense it before you see it. The way their compliments feel hollow, how their eyes linger a little too long on your confidence, how their tone changes when others praise you. They may not openly criticize you. They prefer the subtle art of undermining. They'll disguise envy as concern. Don't you think you're taking on too much? Or, you've changed since you got successful. They'll offer backhanded praise that feels more like poison wrapped in velvet. You'll notice the tension in their laughter, the forced applause that carries the sound of hidden irritation. They pretend to support you because they fear being exposed, but their energy betrays them long before their words do. The envious comparers live in a constant state of psychological hunger. Their sense of self depends on external validation, and when they see someone thriving without their approval, it threatens the fragile illusion they've built around themselves. Instead of learning from others' success, they interpret it as proof of their inadequacy. They don't realize that envy is admiration that hasn't yet evolved. It's a sign of what they wish to become, but rather than pursuing it, they choose to resent it. In doing so, they remain trapped in a cycle of bitterness that only deepens the more they compare. They study you quietly, learning your rhythm, your tone, your creative style. At first it feels flattering. Someone finally notices the details you've worked so hard on. But soon, you see imitation replacing appreciation. They start mirroring your choices, your language, your attitude, trying to recreate what they don't understand, your essence. Yet, essence cannot be copied. What they mimic is surface. What they envy is soul. They want the fruit, but not the roots. They crave the reward, but refuse the inner labor that creates it. These individuals are rarely aware of their own envy. It hides beneath layers of justification. They tell themselves you got lucky, that life favors you unfairly, that you must have taken shortcuts. They rewrite your journey in their mind to make their stagnation feel justified. Because if they admitted the truth, that your success reflects their own unrealized potential, they would have to confront the discomfort of self-honesty. Envy thrives where self-awareness is absent. It's a defense mechanism protecting them from facing the fact that what they despise in you is what they've abandoned in themselves. Their presence slowly corrodes your energy. You start shrinking your light to avoid making them uncomfortable. You downplay your wins, censor your excitement, and keep your achievements quiet because their reactions feel heavy. You begin to associate your growth with guilt. But guilt is the tool envy uses to control you. The moment you start apologizing for your progress, you hand your power to those who refuse to evolve. You can't protect fragile egos by dimming your fire. The world doesn't need your silence. It needs your authenticity, even if your light exposes the places others still hide from. The envious comparers often disguise themselves as allies. They're there when you struggle, but distant when you rise. They thrive in your vulnerability because it reassures them that you are still within reach. But the moment you elevate beyond their comfort zone, their support evaporates. They begin to gossip subtly, questioning your intentions, planting seeds of doubt in others' minds. Success has changed them, they'll whisper, though what truly changed was their perception, their inability to see your growth without interpreting it as threat. You realize then that some friendships are not built on connection, but on equality in limitation. What makes envy so corrosive is its invisibility. It rarely declares itself outright. It hides behind jokes, advice, indifference. You can feel it, but can't always prove it. It lingers in tone, in timing, in silence. Envy doesn't always shout. Sometimes it watches quietly, waiting for your stumble so it can finally exhale in relief. These people don't necessarily wish you harm. They simply wish you smaller. They want your brilliance to stay within the boundaries of their comfort. They want you to succeed, but not more than them. Their envy is not about you. It's about their disconnection from their own potential. You merely awaken the parts of themselves they've ignored. Your courage reminds them of their fear. Your movement highlights their stagnation. Your joy irritates the sorrow they've normalized. In truth, they don't hate your light. They hate that it reveals the darkness they've accepted as permanent. When you understand this, you stop taking their behavior personally. Their resentment is not your fault. It's their soul's silent cry for growth. But awareness doesn't make it less draining. Constant exposure to envy can distort your perception of safety. You begin expecting hostility even from those who mean well. You start questioning who you can trust, wondering if every smile hides competition. That's how the energy of comparison spreads. It creates suspicion where there was once connection. And yet, your role is not to defend your worth, but to remain aligned with it. You are not responsible for the emotions others project onto your success. You are responsible only for ensuring that envy doesn't infect your own heart. Because if you begin comparing yourself to the envious, you become one of them. To exist in peace around the envious comparers, you must understand the quiet violence of insecurity. Their resentment is the language of self-neglect. They have abandoned their own path and now cling to yours as reference. You cannot heal their envy by offering less of yourself. You cannot ease their discomfort by making yourself small. The only way to disarm envy is to live so authentically that imitation becomes impossible and comparison becomes meaningless. Your light must remain steady, even in the presence of those who secretly wish to see it flicker. There are people who enter your life not to harm you, but to reveal you. They act as mirrors, reflecting the parts of yourself you've hidden denied, or rejected. The shadow reflectors don't arrive as comfort. They arrive as triggers. Something about them irritates you, unsettles you, awakens emotions you thought you'd outgrown. You might call them difficult, arrogant, cold, or judgmental, but beneath that label lies an uncomfortable truth. They mirror aspects of your own psyche that you haven't yet made peace with. Their presence becomes a kind of spiritual X-ray, exposing what still needs integration within you. They're not here to destroy your peace. They're here to expose its illusion. You know you've met a shadow reflector when your emotional response to them feels disproportionate. A casual comment from them can sting like an insult. Their silence can feel like rejection. Their success can ignite envy. Their confidence can trigger defensiveness. You tell yourself it's about them, their behavior, their tone, their energy. But beneath the surface, it's about what they awaken in you. They activate the unhealed, the unseen, the unloved parts of yourself that you've tried to bury. And rather than looking inward, the ego projects outward, turning reflection into accusation. It's easier to call them toxic than to admit they've touched a wound you refuse to acknowledge. The shadow reflectors often carry traits that you've disowned. If you've been taught to be humble, you'll find arrogance unbearable. If you've spent your life suppressing anger, you'll despise those who express it freely. If you've hidden your ambition behind false modesty, you'll resent those who pursue theirs unapologetically. Every person you judge harshly holds a piece of you that you've exiled. That's the paradox of the mirror. They reflect what's missing, not just what's visible. You don't hate them for who they are. You hate them for reminding you of what you've denied in yourself. The shadow reflectors challenge the illusion of moral superiority. They show you that beneath every virtue lies its shadow twin. Kindness can hide resentment. Strength can conceal fear. Confidence can mask insecurity. When you encounter someone whose behavior disturbs you, the mind instantly divides they are wrong and you are right. But this division is an escape from the truth that both qualities exist within you. Every judgment you cast outward is a message from the unconscious saying, look here, this too is you. The people who irritate you are not enemies of your peace. They are messengers of your wholeness. But it's not only negative emotions that reveal the mirror. The same principle applies to admiration. When you feel drawn to someone's charisma, creativity, or courage, it's because those qualities already live within you, waiting for permission to emerge. Admiration is the shadow of potential. You see in others what you are capable of becoming. The difference between envy and inspiration lies in self-acceptance. When you're disconnected from your own gifts, someone else's light feels like a threat. When you've embraced them, another's brilliance becomes a spark that awakens your own. Every reflection, whether painful or beautiful, is an invitation to meet yourself more deeply. The shadow reflectors test your emotional maturity. They demand that you hold discomfort without running from it. When someone's behavior triggers anger, jealousy, or defensiveness, the ego wants to point outward to assign blame. But if you pause, you'll notice the deeper movement. Something in you has been stirred because it wants to be seen. The irritation is not punishment, it's revelation. The soul uses discomfort as a doorway to growth. The people who challenge you most are not obstacles, they are catalysts for transformation. However, dealing with these mirrors is rarely easy. The instinct to reject them is strong because self-confrontation feels like exposure. You'll want to prove them wrong, to distance yourself, to protect your self-image. Yet every avoidance strengthens the very pattern you're trying to escape. The more you resist the reflection, the more power it gains over you. The true act of courage is not to cut off the mirror, but to look into it without distortion, to ask, what part of me does this person reveal? What emotion am I trying to suppress? What truth about myself am I refusing to face? When you can answer honestly, the mirror loses its power to wound. Shadow reflectors also reveal how much of your identity is built on contrast. You define yourself by what you're not. I'm not selfish. I'm not angry. I'm not cold. But identity built on opposition requires constant judgment to survive. Every time you meet someone who embodies what you've rejected, it threatens that fragile self-image. You label them as wrong to maintain your illusion of goodness. But the truth is, what you deny in others, you secretly fear within yourself. The path to authenticity demands dissolving these opposites, accepting that you can be both strong and soft, kind and firm, gentle and fierce. Some mirrors come through intimate relationships. Lovers, friends, or family members who seem to press every emotional button you have. You love them deeply, yet they frustrate you endlessly. They are the most powerful reflectors because intimacy removes distance. Their actions expose your attachment wounds, your insecurities, your need for control. You think they're the problem, but they're simply activating the emotions you've left unattended. Every argument, every irritation, every disappointment becomes a lesson in self-awareness if you dare to look beneath the surface. The shadow reflectors aren't confined to people, they can also be circumstances. Failure reflects your fear of inadequacy. Rejection mirrors your struggle with self-worth. Success reveals your capacity for expansion, but also your fear of being seen. Life itself becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting your internal state through external events. Every situation that provokes emotion is a dialogue between your conscious self and your unconscious depths. To live consciously is to participate in that dialogue rather than deny it. When you begin to understand this dynamic, something profound shifts. You stop asking, why are they like this? And start asking, why does this affect me so deeply? That question transforms judgment into awareness. You start to see that every reflection, pleasant or painful, is serving your evolution. The people who trigger you most intensely often carry the keys to your liberation. They show you the borders of your acceptance, the limits of your compassion, the corners of your psyche still ruled by fear. They force you to meet the parts of yourself you've labeled unworthy, unlovable, or unacceptable. And in meeting them, you begin to reclaim the fragments of your wholeness you once abandoned